welcome to another episode of Municipal Focus. My name's Kevin Tocci, and I'll be your host for the next 29 minutes. What we like to do with this particular show, we use it for different concepts, different conversations. We've used it to talk about upcoming national elections. We've used it to talk about big issues. There's a conversation at one time we're talking about casinos. Will a casino come to the city of Brockton? We've used it to speak with leaders in both Whitman and Hanson, the two communities that we serve. And we've used it for other political reasons. We are going to actually today speak with a gentleman who is looking for your vote in 2018 when it comes to not only getting the party's nomination, the Republican Party's nomination, but ultimately in November 2018, he's hoping that you will pick him as the candidate to be your voice in the U.S. Senate. And we have joining us Mr. Geoff Diehl.
Kevin, thanks for having me on.
Thanks. It's nice to have you here. For folks who don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself, if you will.
Sure. Well, I live in the town of Whitman. It's where my wife grew up, so I was very lucky to marry into a wonderful town on the South Shore. We're raising our two daughters, Kaylee and Emily, who are 16 and 11, in the community. We've brought them up here. My wife and I own a small business. It's a performing arts school in the town of Hanson. I am not the teacher. My wife is the director of the school. I help her out. We've got a nice facility that we built ourselves a few years ago. And I was working in the private sector for quite a while for a sign company out of New Bedford. A lot of projects around the state with businesses that were looking to either expand or brand new businesses that were looking to take part in the American dream of opening a business and providing a service or a product to people. And so doing that for quite a while. I actually also was serving on the town of Whitman's finance committee, and I decided back in 2010 to make a run for state representative, because at the time I felt that Beacon Hill was not really listening to the needs of the people of the town of Whitman. And I ended up campaigning for about 2 years, going through the towns of Abington and East Bridgewater, as well as Whitman, which was the district that I now currently hold as a state representative. And I found that people really felt the same way, that maybe they could get some better representation about the money coming back to our towns from Beacon Hill. I was the liaison to the Whitman-Hanson School Board, and we were seeing cuts to Chapter 70 education funds, local aid money that would go for roads and other city and town services was just not coming back. And so, I really felt that strongly that maybe I could do something, make a difference. I'm an Eagle Scout. I earned that when I was 16. You always learn, leave the campground better than you found it. And I always thought, maybe I'd have a boy. I would join a scout troop, and that'd be my chance to kind of give back. But ultimately, two daughters that love ballet and hate to camp out, I found that the best way for me to give back was actually to run for office, go up to Beacon Hill. And in the first term, when I was in 2011, I was actually selected as an emerging leader and got to go to a program down in University of Virginia with 49 other legislators from around the country, and learned a lot about state and federal issues. And I also was able to successfully get some legislation passed in my first term to help with the foreclosure crisis, and that was hitting our state and other states as well pretty badly. And so, for me, serving up on Beacon Hill for the last 7 years, I've been elected 4 times, has really been a chance to listen to the people that elected me, take those concerns up to Beacon Hill, and really try to make a difference for them. And since I've been in office, I've had some really good successes. In fact, in 2013, I was the leader of a ballot question to repeal an index gas tax, a regressive tax that really hit middle to low-income families the hardest. And we ended up winning that issue and saving taxpayers $2 billion, despite the fact that we were outspent 31-1, and nobody gave our ballot question a shot to win. But you know what? We really proved our point on the campaign trail then, and it's been moments up on Beacon Hill where I'm trying to, again, do things for the people that elected me, and I think that's why now I'd like to run for U.S. Senate, because I think down in Washington it's become very clear there's a lot of finger pointing, a lot of people that are grandstanding and not really getting things done for the American people.
Well, that was my next question, is why are you running for U.S. Senate? Is it just that the representation, or are there other things that you feel that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is not able to get from its representation that is down in D.C.?
Well, if people aren't aware, in Massachusetts, we have a congressional delegation of 9 congressmen and women and 2 senators. There isn't a single one of them who are Republican. And what that means is that right now we have a Republican-controlled House and Senate, and a Republican president. And currently the U.S. senator that we have, the senior senator, who's up for re-election in 2018, who I'm running against, has made it a point to basically be the opposition to anything that's getting done down in Washington. And to me, that's not what you're elected for. I have a completely different vision for the job of a U.S. senator as compared to Elizabeth Warren. To me, the job, like I said, is to work for the interest of the people of Massachusetts. She seems to be looking at this seat as a chance to basically be reelected and run for president in 2020, and at the same time has delivered zero to the state of Massachusetts. In fact, voted against a bill, in my opinion, that was very important for Massachusetts last year, the 21st Century Cures Act. And I'll just tell people real quickly, for example, that bill was filed by President Obama. It had Joe Biden's cancer moonshot funding in there to try to end terminal illnesses like cancer, and it was supported bipartisanly by both Republicans and Democrats. The only congressional delegation member to vote against that bill was Elizabeth Warren. And if she had had her way, that bill, which just about 5 months ago released $12 million of funding to Massachusetts to fight the opioid crisis, would never have happened. And so, you've got a senator that seems to now be working solely for the purpose of trying to, promote herself for 2020 and not deliver for the people of Massachusetts. And, just historically, this Senate seat was held once by Ted Kennedy. He was the liberal lion of the Senate. Not a friend to Republicans during election season, but when elections were over, he knew when it was time to work with Republican presidents and Republican governors of Massachusetts to get things done for the people. That's what I see the job of U.S. Senator is, to go to Washington and work for the people, have a seat at the table. I don't think she'll ever have a seat at the table based on the record of trying to obstruct the president in everything he's been doing. His nominees for his cabinet and every bill that he's put forward, whether it's health care reform or tax reform, she said she's going to be the voice of opposition to everything.
How does that hurt her district? How does that hurt the folks here in Massachusetts if she is in complete opposition to anything the administration, the president's administration, puts forth? How does it, whether it's funding or initiatives, how does it hurt this state?
Well, I mean, that's exactly what it's all about. The next time there's a bill that's teed up for that Massachusetts could benefit from, for example, I know that a transportation bill is coming down the pike very soon. Pardon the pun. There's going to be a lot of money that's going to be spent by D.C. and Massachusetts right now, especially with a lot of the development that's happening in Boston, really needs help with funding to get our T back in shape. There was $6 billion of deferred maintenance for the MBTA. The pension fund is in dire straits. Massachusetts could use a shot in the arm from D.C., and how are they going to get that when their senior senator basically is trying to do everything she can to stop the president? They're going to look at Massachusetts. We're basically doomed if Elizabeth Warren is reelected. With me, I have a relationship with the president. I was the only Republican to endorse him in the state. I was the co-chair for his campaign. I have a relationship with Governor Baker. To me, I will be a great voice for the people of Massachusetts down in Washington to get what they need from the federal government.
What are the important issues that Massachusetts is facing at this particular time that, if you are elected, you can be able to help with?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, health care. I mean, clearly, Washington needs to do a better job of trying to get health care fixed. In Massachusetts, our state budget went from 29% to now 42% spending on health care. It's gotten to the point where it's crowding out the money that we need for other things like housing and like education. So we've got to do a better job of fixing health care, and it's been an issue. But the other thing, too, like I mentioned, is transportation. But there's also specific needs that the federal government has, could do to fix Massachusetts. One of them is, in Obama's last year, he declared about 5,000 square miles of fishing area off the South Coast to be a monument status. Very upsetting to a lot of folks in the fishing industry, especially New Bedford. They had no say in the matter, and all of a sudden, overnight, they weren't able to fish all these grounds. The other thing, too, is, I'm not sure if you're aware, there's a gentleman named Carlos Rafael of New Bedford who is about to lose 42 federal fishing licenses because he was falsifying his catch records, and he was also laundering money out of the state. Well, those 42 fishing licenses right now are at risk of being taken out of Massachusetts because states like Maine are lobbying to have them taken away. We need to keep those licenses in Massachusetts, in New Bedford, because not just those fishing families, there's about 241 fishermen and women whose careers depend on those boats going out, but also the subsidiary industries like the ice manufacturers, like the fish processing plants, like the boat repair companies. Those people all need to have that work continue to happen as well. This is millions and millions of dollars, and right now they haven't heard at all from the senior senator, Elizabeth Warren, on getting help to make sure those licenses stay here. They're very upset. I've gone around the state talking to a lot of different groups about this. That was one of the specific issues where she and the federal government could be a better partner in helping Massachusetts. And I'll just mention one other thing too. There's a group up in Lowell called Veterans Assisting Veterans. A guy named John McDonald was I read this in one of the newspapers, the Boston newspapers. He had reached out to the senator's office to get help with a specific veterans issue, and it ultimately took 113 days before his office was contacted by a staffer from her office, and ultimately they didn't even address the issue. He made it onto national television with this issue of her not reaching out to him, and I ended up talking to him, and he was just extremely upset by the fact that he has a group that they don't take any money for the work they do to try to help veterans in that northern part of Massachusetts. And yet, here was a senior senator that was unwilling to even pick up the phone and get in touch with him. So to me, some of the hallmarks of the work I've been doing as a state representative has been to have really intense constituent services, helping people with housing issues, with health care issues, veterans getting their benefits. I've dealt with all these issues. I make sure I get in touch with them immediately to try to help them. You've got to help the people who put you in office because that's what you're there for. But beyond that, it's the ability to work with others across the aisle, and I've proven that, that gets things done. And sometimes if you aren't able to get it done in the legislature, work with a grassroots team outside and try to put some pressure on too. And we did that with the ballot question, again, to stop the gas tax from going up every year without a representative vote. And that was in 2014. We saved taxpayers $2 billion.
And that was recognized nationally, was it not? For that campaign itself, right?
I didn't even know that they had national awards. I guess they call it the Polly Award. So it's like the Oscars or the Emmys. The Pollys are the political awards. Right. We ended up winning in 2015 at the ceremony a Polly Award for having that ballot question because, again, we were able to prove that the money that the state currently spends for our roadways, 4 times the national average. We spend in Massachusetts $675,000 per mile per year to maintain our roads, versus the national average of $145,000. We really, were able to convey that message to the taxpayers that their tax dollars were already being spent in a way that probably wasn't as accountable as it should be, and that Beacon Hill needed to do a better job spending the money they had rather than just go for automatically getting new tax revenue each year. And that would be the only tax in Massachusetts that would have gone up automatically without a vote. That's not, really the way things are done in the state that really started no taxation without representation.
It's a big accomplishment as a state representative. What other accomplishments have you been able to get done? What are some of the things that you've been able to do while in office?
Well, another one that I think really goes a little bit unheralded too is the fact that right after that ballot question in 2014, in 2015, we had a new governor, Charlie Baker, and the day after he was sworn in, we found out that Boston 2024, this group that was set up to try to get the Olympics to come to Boston and to Massachusetts, they wanted us to have, the Olympics in the city, and they didn't tell us that taxpayers were going to be on the hook for the overruns. They told us that it would be profitable Olympics. Well, we found out there was a second version of the bid that told the International Olympic Committee that the Massachusetts taxpayers would pay for the overruns. So as soon as I found out that there was this plan to have the Olympics come, I got a little suspicious about the fact that, where was the money going to come from? Because the last 5 Olympics that have been held have had overruns of about $10 billion on average.
Wow.
London went from $5 billion to $15 billion. The Montreal 76 Olympics just finished paying off their bonds a few years ago. That's how long and how expensive these Olympics can be. So we knew something was up, and especially the plans they had. They wanted to, one of the ideas was to cut down the trees on the Common, build a temporary stadium, tear the stadium down and put the trees back up. I mean, it really almost read like a Dr. Seuss book or something like
Well,
that.
and you look at Massachusetts. The money you just quoted, $15 billion. Does Massachusetts need another big dig?
Well, and that's the problem, right? So the Olympics tend to go from city to city or state to state or country to country and set up these elaborate Olympics only to tear them down, and then you end up having, like in Rio, a situation where the land and all the buildings are basically evacuated, and there's nobody using them. They decay and fall apart. It was a total waste of your investment.
Right.
And again, we could spend $10 billion in Massachusetts a lot more effectively than just on having the Olympics happen. And by the way, former Governor Deval Patrick, who was just out of office recently, was getting paid $7,500 a day to try to promote this and try to get it done up on Beacon Hill. I filed language in the House to prevent the taxpayers from having to fund the overruns. Now, it got shot down in the House, so I partnered with Evan Falchuk, who had just run for governor as an independent. He and I actually went to college together.
It's a strange union, though. It was from another party.
That's true. However, we both believed in the same thing, which is accountability to the citizens of this state first and foremost. And he saw the Olympics as a boondoggle just as I did. He had his United Independent volunteers and our gas tax folks turned around and we partnered and said, let's do another ballot question to prevent this because the legislature wasn't going to take the taxpayers off the hook. Well, only a week or two after we filed the language to prevent Olympics being funded by taxpayers, Boston 2024 said, you know what, forget it. The game is up.
Threw the hands up.
We're gonna leave town, and they ended up going elsewhere. So the good news is, even though we didn't have to, fire a shot, get a signal signature, we were able to ultimately prevent, I think, a major boondoggle from happening in our state down the road that really would have been an economic disaster for the people of Massachusetts.
And you were able to lead the way by putting politics aside, party politics aside, and united with another group in order to be able to mobilize for this, right?
You've got to be willing, when you serve up on Beacon Hill, to withstand pressure, not just from your constituents when you vote certain ways, but also from the parties that run things up there. I mean, whether it's your own party, whether it's the majority party, you have to be willing to stand up for what's right. And it's not always the easiest thing to do, but if I didn't do that, I certainly wouldn't be able to go home at night and be able to sleep based on a guilty conscience. So for me, it's always been a public service and a calling rather than a career.
My understanding is that you're currently collecting signatures in regards to the sales tax. Tell me why you're doing that.
Yeah, actually, I brought an example by just for people to see. This is what they look like. This is a ballot question signature form, and what people do is they can fill out their name and their address, and basically we need to get 67,000 of these to get it on the ballot. And what we're trying to do is basically bring the sales tax from 6.25% back down to 5%. That's what it was 10 years ago, 5%. And the other thing we're trying to do with the ballot question is also create a permanent sales tax holiday weekend. The legislature has been doing this for years, giving this one weekend in August so that retailers can have sort of a bump in their economy at a very slow time.
And it also helps families who have kids that are going back to school. It's a great time of year for that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, look, anytime you bring the tax down on goods, you're helping middle-class families that are having a struggle right now as it is making ends meet, whether it's healthcare costs,
Sure.
whether it's home costs, or whether it's maybe they've got some kids in college, and college is not cheap right now. Any way that we can try to put money back in people's wallets is what I'm trying to do. Same as the gas tax. That gas tax, if it had been allowed to go up automatically every year without a vote, we weren't just going to be hitting the state wouldn't just be hitting people in their pocket when they were filling up their car. Also, all the goods they purchased would have that additional transportation cost, added on to it from transporting them in-state with the gas tax. The other thing too is municipalities in Massachusetts are not exempt from the state gas tax, and so every police car, every fire truck, every ambulance, every school bus, all the gas they use would have been additional cost that would have been passed on to you, the resident, through your property taxes. So it really was the gas tax win was a huge win for taxpayers across the board, and putting more money in people's pockets that really could use it. And again, we feel like the sales tax, reducing it back down to 5%. This is a legislature, you're probably going to hear them say that we can't afford it. Well, they're the same legislature that just gave themselves at the beginning of this session a massive pay raise, in some cases 40 to 60% salary increases, some cases $130,000 to serve up on Beacon Hill, which should be a calling. Again, like I said, they've turned into a career, and now a lucrative career. the cost to taxpayers annually is about $18 million, and that's right around what the cost of the sales tax holiday weekend is to provide that economic stimulus to small businesses and retail storefronts around the state of Massachusetts. So to me, the legislature can afford it. It's just a matter of where the priorities are, and to me, it's always been trying to keep more money in people's pockets because to me, liberty and freedom starts with your economic freedom and what you can do with the money that you've earned.
Well, talking about money and taxes, the Republicans have put up forth a tax plan. Have you had a chance to see it? What do you think of it?
First of all, I think it's overdue. We have a 4 million word tax code. If you can think about that, it kind of boggles the mind. Just the average citizen to try to go through and figure out what they're eligible for deductions. It's so difficult that people end up hiring, companies like H&R Block or some accountant to deal with their taxes if they can. Maybe use Quicken or things like that. Mm-hmm. What the goal here is to simplify it down to just one page so that anybody and everybody can basically pay their taxes with as little time and energy invested in it as possible. So that's one of the goals. The other thing too is to reduce it down to the point where, corporate taxes, right now in the United States, our corporate tax is the highest in the industrialized world. We're the United States. We want to have manufacturing come back to our country. We've lost, we almost lost Carrier, the air conditioning company, to Mexico. Luckily, the president was able to get that back. Ford almost took their business outside our borders. Apple is over in China. We want to have those companies back here, that manufacturing back in our country, back in Massachusetts. And so, to me, the step that's being taken by Congress right now to bring that the tax rate down for corporations is great because it's going to accelerate the job market. It's going to finally give a lot of workers that increase in pay. Maybe they'll actually see a pay increase, not quite what Beacon Hill gave themselves, but maybe they'll see a raise in their salary now that we're going to have more investment by companies with more money back in their pocket. Part of the goal, too, is to repatriate about $2.5 to $3 trillion that's been taken offshore in our country because of the onerous tax rates. And so it's going to really be an accelerant to job growth and to just general growth in our country to begin with. But secondly, they also want to increase the personal deductions so that we can have, again, middle to low income families can have more money deducted off their taxes and basically keep more. So I think it's a great help to those folks. The one thing I am concerned about is the loss of deductions for your municipal and state taxes, meaning like your property taxes, and that's really one of the hard ones for Massachusetts. We're a state with high property taxes, not quite like New Hampshire, but high property taxes in Massachusetts basically mean that deduction, having the loss of the deduction, is going to be a real hit to the families who have invested in homes across the state, homes and apartments. And so I think that's something where, again, down in Washington, if we have a Republican that's being able to work in the Senate with the administration, instead of a senator that said she's already going to block any efforts to reform taxes, you're going to have a partner that's going to be able to negotiate for Massachusetts and help them. Again, we have no voice when we have somebody who is just purely obstructing what's going on down in Washington, D.C. So, I'm hoping, too, that people look at this as a perfect example of why it's good to have a Republican who's been serving in office, working for the needs of the people down in Washington, rather than someone who has been serving in office for 4.5 years, written 2 books on our dime, made $1.6 million for herself, but again has yet to deliver on any financial windfall for our state of Massachusetts.
You touched upon a couple of things as to how the incumbent U.S. Senator has failed this state. Are there other things that folks may not be aware of as to how the senior senator is failing Massachusetts?
Well, some of it I've mentioned is tangible, whether it's the 21st Century Cures Act or whether it's not necessarily helping the fishing industry, but some of it's intangible. And I think, one of the things that I was very disturbed by was during the last book tour that our senator had when she was going around the country promoting that book, she was in New York City on talk shows saying that anybody who had voted for the president was part of an ugly stew of racists, okay? Now that basically puts about 50% of the population of the United States who voted, basically puts them in a category of being called racist by our senior senator. Very similar to when Hillary Clinton called people deplorable, if they supported the president. And that is not, the language we need down in Washington, D.C., this constant finger pointing and lecturing and yelling at people. that's not helping the people of Massachusetts. It's not helping our country. And even worse, she went to an NAACP dinner a few months ago and said that it's law enforcement that continues to terrorize the African American community. These are words that are specifically used to divide us as people and pit us against each other at a time when we have a lot of challenges facing us, whether it's the economy in China, whether it's Russian oil interests, or whether it's the North Korean nuclear threat, or whether it's Iran and their nuclear developments. We need to be united as a country right now, facing a lot of external threats, and I think Senator Warren does not represent a unified country. She seems to want to divide us for her own political gain.
I have seen you on social media crisscrossing the state, getting the word out. How are voters responding to your campaign?
Well, it's first of all been an incredible, honor to serve people in my representative district. But now to go around the entire state and talk to people, they have not been heard for a long time. And for me, this is exciting to actually listen to them, have them tell me what they're thinking. And a lot of the things they're saying are they're concerned about immigration, they're concerned about sanctuary cities, they're concerned about the economy, their jobs, healthcare, like I mentioned. So the reception I'm getting is they're finally getting somebody who's actually listening to them, who's willing to put in that work, that time and effort to try to represent them. And I've been having a lot of people get involved in the campaign, whether it's taking bumper stickers or signing up for lawn signs or helping with the collect signatures to get that sales tax down to 5%. We have a ton of people out there across the state that are now helping with the Senate campaign, and I hope other folks will consider getting involved too. In fact, Kevin, if they want to get involved, they should go to dealforsenate.com, and that's www.dealforsenate.com.
I want to thank you very much for coming in,
Thanks,
talking
Kevin.
about your campaign. Get to know who your candidates are, who the individuals are that are running for race. And we thank you for tuning in. Until next time, thank you for watching Municipal Focus.
DAV stands behind America's veterans to make their transition back home easier with free services and help getting the benefits they've earned. Help us fulfill the promise to our men and women who served. Go to DAV.org to learn more.
In the small town of Elmira, New York, a boy was born into an all-American family. The odds of him opening his own clothing store at the age of 18? 1 in 138,000. Excited to be a part of pop culture, he packed for the big city. The odds of finding someone to invest in his vision? 1 in 4.5 million. The odds of him achieving his dream in the fashion industry? 1 in 23 million. The odds of having a child diagnosed with autism? 1 in 88. I am Tommy Hilfiger, and my family is affected by autism. Learn more at autismspeaks.org/signs. Early diagnosis can make a lifetime of difference.
Don't walk. Don't walk. Walk. Do not enter. Hot dogs. Definitely like hot dogs. Motorcycle club. Everything must go. Ghostly ghouls. Don't look at that, Teddy. Body piercing. Ouch.
Everyday moments can become teaching
right,
moments
buddy.
because learning starts long before school does. Give your child the start they need at bornlearning.org.